as we say good evening also to Sir Ronald Saunders. Good evening to you, sir.
Yeah, good evening to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, all across the country, wherever you're joining us from, a wonderful, warm good evening to you all. Welcome to room 592, where we unleash the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are privileged to have with us Sir Ronald Saunders. For those of you who would have joined that broadcast, our broadcast during that day when we are getting a feedback, Leonard.
I'm hearing something there. 1 second, please. Let's try to see what happened.
That's it. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies, our apologies. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to room 592, where we unleash the truth. To those of you who had followed the presentations that were made at the last OAS session, it was an impassioned, for my phrase at this stage, an impassioned presentation, an impassioned, short, but powerful speech that was delivered by no other than Sir Ron Saunders at the OAS session, reflecting not just his care for Guyana, but his care for democracy. And Sir Ronald, I will say to you, sir, that I was sitting at my home looking at your presentation and I felt your emotions, sir. I know you're a diplomat and you do not show emotions necessarily, but your words contained a lot of feeling, sir, not just for Guyana, but it was ingrained in the phrase you used, especially when you said to the world that democracy is being delayed, and democracy delayed is democracy denied. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 147 days, agonizing days, since our general elections. We don't know how long more, but one thing we do know for sure, because of the work of persons of the caliber of Sir Ronald Saunders, the world is on the side of democracy. The world continues to want and hope for the best to happen for Guyana and for the world. Democracy in Guyana will present itself as democracy for the rest of the world. And so, Sir Ronald, welcome once again, sir. And if you don't mind, may I ask you, for you to make such a speech at such an August session, sir, what would have been your mindset? What would have been going through Sir Ronald's mind at that time to make such an impassioned, powerful, impactful speech, sir?
Well, there are a couple of factors. One of them is that we were talking to an audience of 34 ambassadors representing 34 countries, all of the independent states of Latin America and the Caribbean, the United States, and Canada. Now, the glue that holds people together is the sense that they have rights and they have freedoms, and that they should be able to express those rights and freedoms in many diverse ways. But one of them is to choose by a democratic method the government that it would like to run its affairs for whatever period of time the constitution of a country allows that government to function. And when the people have had elections and have decided that they wish to change or keep the regime in office, that is the people's wish. And as they say, the voice of the people is the voice of God. And what was important at that meeting was to have everybody understand that Guyana, the people of Guyana, are a democratic people, that they are freedom-loving, with every right to be freedom-loving, because they come out of a background of slavery and indentured labor, of exploitation, of various forms of oppression. But generations of Guyanese, through their trade union movements, through their political movements, have sought freedom for the people of Guyana so that they can express their will, not only in elections, but in other forms of democratic living. And it was important that the Permanent Council of the OAS understand that the people of Guyana are democratic. What in Guyana, as in other places in the world, there are sometimes incidents that occur that hold that passion, that important feeling about freedom, a hostage. And when that happens, it is the rights of the people that must be defended. And what you asked me was going through my mind at that time. It was that I felt that the rights of the people of Guyana had to be defended, had to be upheld, and that whatever efforts were being made to stifle the will of the people had to be brought to an end. And it was not something that I was saying in isolation. I think anybody who looked at that Organization of American States meeting would recognize that all of the speakers spoke to the same theme. And incidentally, it was not that there had been any collusion or discussion by the member states before that meeting occurred. That meeting, we are all existing in a period of COVID. COVID means that the Organization of American States has not been able to meet person to person physically since March the 20th. So all of the contact that has been made has been virtual. And at no time before that meeting did the member states have a discussion on Guyana. So what you heard on that day was the genuine expression by member states of how they felt about conditions in Guyana.
Thank you, Sir Ron. And indeed, we found it a remarkable event in Guyana, our local viewers here, because not one country, not a single country at that session even hesitated to call for the will of the people to be respected in their own diplomatic languages. Everybody backed this. So Ron, you would have said recently in an article that there is likelihood that another session of the OAS may be happening anytime soon, on which Guyana may potentially be on the agenda again, sir. Your comments, please.
Yes, I think undoubtedly Guyana will come back to the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States. It could come back sooner rather than later. It depends on what happens after the Court of Appeal, that's now hearing an appeal against the Chief Justice's judgment of a few days ago. When that judgment comes down, if it is the finality of this process, if it is that the Caribbean Court of Justice's rulings are upheld, and that everybody understands that but there must be a declaration of the election, there must be a declaration of the result of the March 2nd elections, and that election result can only be based on the national recount, which was scrutinized by CARICOM, observed by the Organization of American States, and many other representatives of governments from the Organization of American States, and indeed local organizations too. And everybody agreed that that recount was a fair and accurate reflection of the votes that were cast and could be counted at that election. That is how the international community feels about this. And the international community has invested a great deal of time, high-powered effort, and money into ensuring that this process for Guyana is one that is free and fair, that respects the will of the people, and that brings Guyana firmly into the international community with an embrace for a country that respects democracy. That is what we all want to see. So if the Court of Appeal upholds the Caribbean Court of Justice position and the position of the Chief Justice, and the Elections Commission goes ahead and makes a declaration of the election based on that process, and the political parties and everybody else in Guyana accepts that that is the situation and proceed to swear in a government which reflects the will of the people. Then there may be a meeting of the Permanent Council simply to congratulate Guyana, to express its happiness for the people of Guyana that they have this matter behind them, to look forward to Guyana taking firm hold of the economic opportunities that now lie before it and making something of the country economically, and using that newfound economic strength to build its institutions of democracy so firmly for the future that there can be no repetition of this kind.
Thank you, sir. And sir, you mentioned there, yes, if when the judgment is delivered, that GCOM proceeds, makes a declaration and the usual. What if the converse now, sir?
Well, there will be a Permanent Council meeting again, a different kind of Permanent Council meeting. First of all, we would have to, we are pretty sure if they make a decision that goes against the Chief Justice's decision and the judgments of the Caribbean Court of Justice, we are pretty sure that they're going to appeal that case as well. But who are they appealing it to? They're appealing it to the Caribbean Court of Justice and asking the court to make a ruling against itself.
Yes.
Well, that is most unlikely to happen. And I think everybody knows that. So unless it is a filibustering tactic, unless it is a tactic simply to delay, then it really is rather pointless exercise. But it may very well be that there will be those who will be disposed to taking this thing as far as they can and testing the patience of the international community, and indeed testing the remarkable forbearance of the Guyanese people who have remained peaceful and calm throughout this entire process. The one could understand there must be a great sense of frustration and irritation in the community, and people wanting to go out and protest this, and to say, this is wrong, and we must bring it to an end. The fact that the Guyanese people have been so restrained it is a remarkable tribute to the people of Guyana of all races, of all religions, of all kinds, who have sat back and said, fine, we will see this process go through, because at the end of the day, we want a government that is democratically elected, that we can hold accountable for what they do for the next 5 years. So if the converse happens, as you say, and they take the thing back to the Caribbean Court of Justice, we will have to wait for the Caribbean Court of Justice to make a determination. I was very relieved to see that even though the court is going on its summer vacation, arrangements have been made that this case, should it be appealed to them, that it will be heard again. And I suspect that it will be dispatched fairly quickly. And if the Caribbean Court of Justice once again, in this case, which has been tried 3 times now, says that its position remains the same, at that point, we expect what I said to happen would happen. And if that does not happen, well, then the Permanent Council will meet and take a very strong position on any government, anybody who is in authority in Guyana that refuses to accept the judgments of the court on so many occasions, and to continue to frustrate the democratic process.
Thank you, sir. And sir, I want to come back a little bit to the last session of the OAS. Listeners and viewers across the country, we are aware that the day following the OAS session, there are a number of state media outlets that would have been used to peddle the information that Venezuela was not a part of the OAS, that Venezuela had given notice that it was coming out of the OAS. Your comments, sir, because I went on the OAS website and checked, and I saw that Venezuela was, and in fact, I think in 2019, this current ambassador was reappointed to the position. But your correction or comment, sir?
Well, Venezuela is still listed as a member of the organization. It's a technical position, and it's important that you understand this. The man who spoke before Venezuela is the representative of Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido is the head of the National Assembly in Venezuela, and he is regarded by the majority of member states of the organization, the United States, so not all of them, as the legitimate government of Venezuela. They regard Nicolas Maduro's regime as being a regime that has installed itself illegally, that has not held free and fair elections, that keeps putting off elections so that the people of Venezuela cannot speak to this issue. Now, the truth is that it's a technical argument as to who recognizes Maduro and who recognizes Guaido. But in the case of the Organization of American States, the majority of countries do recognize Guaido and recognize Gustavo Tarre, who spoke at the US meeting as his representative and therefore the representative of Venezuela. So, but Gustavo Tarre does not represent Maduro or the government that is in office in Venezuela. So that's an important point to recognize. Right. He was speaking for Juan Guaido, for the National Assembly, for that faction of the Venezuelan people who enjoy the support of countries, the majority of countries in the US, including the United States, Canada, Brazil, the Lima Group, and others. So I just wanted to make that point of that technical position, but to the extent that Juan Guaido is recognized as the head of the legitimate government of Venezuela, then yes, Venezuela was at that meeting and spoke.
Great. Leonard?
Yes, good evening, sir. How you doing? I saw the last time that you were, of course, grieving with the rest of the region with the passing of Mr. Owen Arthur. And of course, again, we express our condolences. I want to ask you, sir, if you may jump right into things. If you don't believe that what we might be saying here might be hot air, because based on the actions of the coalition right now, there seem to be no respect or any kind of indications that they are paying attention to more than 100 countries who would be saying or joining with the rest of the world, the other very important organizations that they're part of, like CARICOM, Commonwealth, OAS, who's saying that let's look at the recount, let us pay attention to the recount and use those figures. Are we blowing hot air, sir?
Well, I hope not. Look, there comes a point in the life of any group of persons who believe that their cause is just and that they're right in what they're saying, to recognize the reality that the rest of the world is not buying that story, and that the rest of the world is not going to accept it, that the rest of the world has seen an election held on March 2nd, which everybody, including all the political parties on that night and the next day, said was a free and fair election. Nobody heard any political party saying that that election was not free and fair. We didn't hear the chief elections officer saying it wasn't a free and fair election. We didn't hear the returning officer, Mr. Mingo, say it wasn't a free and fair election. We didn't hear anybody on the Electoral Commission saying it wasn't a free and fair election. The idea that it wasn't a free and fair election seemed to have arisen only after Mr. Mingo produced figures for Region 4, which startled people who were observing it, and therefore led to the recount that we saw CARICOM come and scrutinize over 33 very difficult days. So the rest of the world is convinced that Guyana did have a free and fair election on March 2nd. The Guyanese people went out and expressed their will peacefully. Indians and people of Indian and African descent next to each other, casting their votes, then going about their business. And everybody then sat back waiting for the election result, expecting it to come the next day, the government to be announced, and for them to carry on with their lives. At all times, holding whichever party had been elected to account for its stewardship of the country. That did not happen. So we know everything that has happened since then, including the national recount. And we know that that recount was scrutinized very carefully. And that CARICOM team that went to Guyana was a very, very experienced team of people. Now, I can speak for John Jarvis, who came from Antigua and Barbuda. I can speak for Jarvis because I've known him for a long time. Jarvis has been an electoral officer in very, very difficult circumstances. But he's a fair-minded man who cannot be browbeaten by anybody. And we have never had in Antigua, I have to say, any situation in which the Electoral Commission had been accused of any kind of skullduggery. And people hold to the principle of democracy and the rule of law very firmly in these countries, which I notice my good friend Raphael Trotman said were sparsely populated places and therefore unable to advise on elections. That was a very curious statement because the truth of the matter is the most sparsely populated country, CARICOM, is Guyana. The most densely populated country is Barbados. And then you have Antigua coming at about third in that list of densely populated places. And running free and fair elections has been it's a characterization of the countries of the Eastern Caribbean. So they've had long experience of free and fair elections, but they've not had experience of rigged elections.
And so, Ron, recently, to continue that same point, if you don't mind, sir, recently on Friday, July 24th, you compared Guyana and Suriname, and you highlighted the fact that Suriname had in its history a coup, and it emerged from that, and Mr. Boutusa would have handed over the reins of power in Suriname, but that Guyana is known, not nicely, but known for its disputed elections. Sir, the question I have for you is that with regards to sanctions, you may have known, sir, that the APNO AFC operatives may have said, well, we don't care what sanctions, who care about whose visa is taken away. A direct question to you, Sir Ronald Sanders. Is there a likelihood that the sanctions could get even tougher? It could go to move out from individual sanctions to more economic sanctions. What are the paradigms here, sir?
Well, I think you're right. Anybody who believes that the initial sanctions that a regime faces, and in this case, in Guyana, the United States has decided that it will not issue visas to a number of unnamed persons, though I think when those persons go to travel, they are. But anybody who believes that that is the end of it is not looking at what's happening in nearby Venezuela. Mm-hmm. That's how the United States started, and Canada started with Venezuela. The removal of visas to travel from officials. The thing has escalated since then. Their properties have been seized. Their properties of their families held abroad have been seized, and it then moved on to other things, such as state-owned enterprises. If you look every day, the United States State Department issues a list of sanctioned persons, companies, every day. Every day they produce that list. Now, the list covers the whole world. It has a remarkable number of Iranians, of North Koreans, of people from Iraq, Afghanistan, and it has people on it from Latin America. Uh, Venezuelans are on it, people from Bolivia are on it, even people from Brazil are on it. But it's not just persons, it's not just natural persons, it's corporate persons too. So that right now, there are sanctions against Venezuelan ships going into ports, doing business, any company that does business with the United States, any company that also does business with a sanctioned company from Venezuela is itself going to get United States sanctions. So that it has a domino effect. The United States may put sanctions, and people say, well, it's only the United States. But the United States is such a powerful figure in the international financing and trading system that it touches you. Because if you want to do business with an American company or with the United States, and you are doing business with a company that is sanctioned, you get sanctioned. And most companies don't put themselves in that situation. They simply say, well, I know we've done business, but we can't continue to do it because there are
Yogi, if you
government
may, sorry,
sanctions.
sorry about that. We getting Sauron in and out, and the audio is not coming out. Could you fix the mic there, Sauron? Could you? Our apologies. Sorry, you hearing us?
Yes, we heard that little clearing of the
Yes,
throat.
yes, I heard
Well,
that.
I didn't realize I was the problem.
Yes, thank you very much.
If not, I'd have cleared my throat
Yeah,
already.
yeah, thank you very much. People want to hear you very clearly. They're saying, no, we need to
Yes,
hear Sauron. Thank you.
yes.
Yeah,
So,
so I think what I was telling you is that anybody who believes sanctions is going to end the public war.
it's gone again, sir.
I was saying that if anybody believes that sanctions will end with the restrictions on visas on a number of people, quite wrong. It's going to ratchet up, and the more difficult a regime becomes in accepting democracy and the rule of law, the more the thing is going to be ratcheted. And you only need to go to look at Venezuela and see what's happening. Eventually, it will be tough. It could lead to the fact that you may not be able to have financial transactions. Because if banks decide that they're not going to deal, United States banks, that is, are not going to deal with sanctioned institutions in Guyana, those institutions can't do business with those banks or through those banks. And the banks in Guyana themselves are going to have to take that on board because if they start doing business with a sanctioned company, then they are open to sanctions from the United States. And those sanctions could include cutting off correspondent banking relations so that they cannot do a single transaction. And if they can't do transactions through the United States, they're going to be very hard pressed to find correspondent banking relations to settle their bills internationally. And believe me that if the United States starts that, it's not going to be too long before the European Union kicks in as well. You must remember that they're all part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which has a global forum on things like tax and money laundering and so on. And they're also important members of the Financial Action Task Force, which has already laid down rules for how banking transactions could occur with countries and institutions and people who have been the subject of sanctions.
Thank you
I'm
very
not hearing you now.
Yes, sorry about that.
Sorry, sir.
Well,
Go
Yogi, if I may continue
Yes.
to ask him, Sauron, today there was a major development, and as a follow from the line of the questions a little earlier, three charges, private criminal charges, filed by apparently supporters of the coalition. And I want to ask you if the region should not be digging in, or the rest of the world who wants this matter over with and done should not be digging in the heels and say, we're in for the long haul for this.
Well, I think the region has indicated that they are Guyana is a part of CARICOM. Uh, Guyana is what happens in Guyana is important to CARICOM because of the familial relationship. Uh, I use the word familial, meaning family, and that is how the countries of CARICOM see each other. Remember, Guyana is a founding member of the Caribbean community, and before that of CARIFTA.
Yes.
Um, Guyana is tightly bound to what happens. And here's the other thing I would remind you. Many tens of thousands of Guyanese are scattered throughout the CARICOM area. They've now become citizens of those countries, they live in those countries, and the ties and bonds between Guyana and these countries, therefore, are not just ties of politics, it's ties of blood. Real, it's a really integrated relationship. So yes, CARICOM is in there for the long haul. But with regard to the uh, private criminal charges that have been brought against Chair of GCOM, I don't think any of us can take that seriously. It's clearly a kind of tit for tat situation because Mr. Lowenfield also had private criminal charges brought against him. The truth of the matter is that all of this is just nonsense. It's foolishness, to use an Owen Arthur word. And really, it should stop. What we need to do is to get on with the real business at hand, and that is the declaration of an election result to free the people of Guyana to get on with their lives. This idiocy of taking people on private criminal adventures is really nonsense. I felt the same way, incidentally, about Lowenfield as Lowenfield as I feel about this. It's a pappy show. It's a side act. It's not the main event. And why would anyone want to spend time on this except to inflame feelings? And this tit for tat reaction is not conducive progress for anybody. It continues to inflame a situation unnecessarily, and really it should be brought to an end.
Right. So, Ronald, over the past couple of weeks, sir, I think there is something happening behind the scenes because every time they achieve a delay via litigation, there is a new narrative that those couple of days end up bringing to the fore. And the last set of litigations that would have happened, you see the narrative come out with a call for negotiation, a call for discussion. Last night, Sir Ronald, in room 592, we had representatives of a couple of the other political parties. We had invited APNU AFC, but they didn't respond. And the PPPC, the ANOG, and the TCI, they said, and LJP, they all said that they cannot negotiate on the duress. They're not going to negotiate. Sir, what is Sir Ronald Saunders' thoughts with regards to APNU AFC calling for negotiations at this stage?
Well, I think there's a time for negotiation, but not until after the election result has been declared. And what you're negotiating about is a different matter. You're not negotiating the election result. Election result is what it is. The people have cast their votes. There's been a recount, their figures. That's what the election is about. What a negotiation should be about after the election result and after a government has been installed is how Guyana is taken forward. Do the political parties continue to try to foster these feelings of this business of racism in order to stay in power? Do they begin to recognize that when you run in an election, you're not running for half the people or part of the people, you're running to get the support of as many of the people as you can. And when you are in government, you're the government of all of the people. And you must govern in a fair and equitable manner, ensuring that the benefits of the economy, the benefits of all the sectors of the society are shared as equitably and as fairly as they can be amongst the people. And what the negotiation should be about is how you achieve that. Not about how you achieve, you can't have a negotiation on what your view is of the election result and the figures. That's foolishness. The election result and the figures are what they are. They're not a matter for negotiation.
Right. But Sir Ron, if I may push you on that same point a little bit, sir. So today, for example, we had a caller into our daytime program, and his point was that there are good people on both sides, and maybe we need to have these sides talk. And last night, to your point, Bishop Edgil and Timothy Jonas, Bishop Edgil especially, he basically echoed the same sentiments you had. How can you negotiate the results? But sir, Peter Wickham, we had him in room 592, and he said that maybe APNO AFC, maybe somebody there needs a Sir Ronald or somebody to come in, even if it were a matter of show. I mean, these are not his words directly, but he suggested that maybe the APNO needs to be told there will be amnesty. You're not going to be jailed. You're not going to be, somebody needs to give some assurance, some way to have them step down, or else they're not going to step down. What's your reaction to that, sir?
Well, I mean, there is some merit in what Peter is saying about the necessity for people, but he's not talking about negotiating the result.
That's right.
He's talking about negotiating how you get people who are now in charge of the country concede that they've lost the election. Look, I led a negotiating team in 2016 to Haiti in very difficult circumstances, very different from what is happening in Ghana now, far more exposing. President of Haiti, Michel Martelly's term had come to an end. However, elections that were due to be held months before to decide on the new president, and he incidentally could not run again because he'd run his 2 terms, but his party had a candidate. But those elections ended up in disruption because of violence and various things. The election commission resigned. All sorts of things happened. So there had been no election. But his term of office had come to an end constitutionally. And there was a cabal around him who did not want him to vacate office, even though his term had ended. And indeed, there was some merit in that because, unlike in the Guyana situation, there had not been an election. So there was no automatic group that you could look at to say, well, these are the people who were elected and therefore should form the government. I spent 14 days in that country, morning, noon, and night, working between the Senate, which was still an elected body, the Parliament, which had elected representatives, and the executive, being Mr. Martelly's government, to try to get them to come to an understanding that Mr. Martelly would demit office at midnight on the night his term came to an end, and that on the next day, he himself would anoint as an interim president somebody elected by the Parliament. Because remember, the Parliament was still in session. There's a different kind of situation in Haiti. Parliament could have continued elections with presidents. And eventually we brokered that solution, but it wasn't easy because Michel Martelly had around him a group of people whose power, whose wealth, whose authority depended upon him being the president, because he was his
right.
So the last thing they wanted was for Michel Martelly to leave, because if he left, then they're gone too. And I spent a long time, as I said, negotiating between him and the people who Joseph Kaieteur, who became president for about 18 months after that. But part of what we agreed was that there ought to be no recrimination. We shouldn't be a witch hunt after the elections were over. There shouldn't be a going after people to lock them up or to make their lives a misery. Obviously, where there was wrongdoing and wrongdoing was obvious, then those things have to be addressed in the normal course of the law. But the government itself was not going to initiate that kind of action. And
Yeah.
when we had that understanding with Mr. Martelli, and he left that we signed an agreement. They signed it, he signed it. I was its witness, and I announced it to the Haitian people and to the world that that agreement had been made. Now, it depends again also on the will of people to see the bigger picture. What possible benefit could there be to hold on to office, to exercise power in Guyana, in a situation where the majority of the people don't want you to be exercising, and therefore where your ability to govern will become extremely difficult and more difficult every day. But beyond that, you have an international community that is not cooperating with you. You will wake up every morning trying to figure out how the hell you're going to get through this day. And it's not going to be easy. And every day the problems are going to mount and mount and mount. And you don't have a parliament, you can't pass a budget. Can't pass a budget, you can't allocate money to ministry. You can call yourself Minister of Foreign Affairs, Attorney General, God himself. If you don't have a parliamentary approval of that cabinet, of that spending, then that spending is illegal. And that's not a good thing to do, because eventually it will catch up with you. Don't believe that unless the plan is to run the country forever in those circumstances, in which case there will not be much of a country left. You will be ruling because you want to be the captain of the ship, will be a captain of a ship that is slowly sinking. You will be the last person on the deck, but the ship will be gone. That's what you want. Then that's what, unfortunately, you get. But the people who will suffer in that circumstance, you eventually, all the people of Guyana before that. How long do you think people will put up with that? Even your own supporters. I think the time comes when people say, enough is enough. We've tried, we've gone the full length of the wire. Now it's time to stop. Let's look for some alternative way out of this.
Great. Thank you, Sir Ron. And Sir Ron, on the same point again, like yesterday, I think it was, the finance minister made an amazing statement that, this economy, not his words, but he's alluding that the economy is booming, that we are doing so well. Why are all these naysayers saying all these bad things about the Guyanese economy? I don't know which economy he's talking about. But, sir, it seems like we are telling ourselves, the government, that is, would be saying so much lies that they are actually saying it so that they could believe it themselves. My point, coming back to the negotiation, sir, the issue we have in Guyana, the population, majority of the population feel that even if you were to get into negotiation with APNU AFC for whatever reason, what assurance we would have that they can hold their end of the negotiation, and that for the next 50 years, from paragraph 1 to paragraph 50 is not going to be litigated in the courts one after the other, because that's what they have shown. But sir, on the other side of it, is there a likelihood that people like yourselves, people like the new CARICOM chairman, can say, okay, you know what, everything has happened, let's put it behind us. Mr. Granger, Mr. Jagdeo, can we talk?
Well, talk about what? I mean, that's the question. If again, it comes back to what is this? What is it you want to talk about? There is a necessity for all the parties in Guyana, but it can't be about the election result. You can't negotiate what people have voted for. And the fact, and if you are saying that there was irregularities and 115,000 people voted that shouldn't have voted, that's a matter for an election petition at the court. And you go there and prove it. And if you are so sure of that case, then you should not fear going that route. Correct. Because if you can produce the evidence that is so overwhelmingly convincing in your own mind that these elections are stolen, you can prove it. And Mr. Leonard says he knows it so, even though it was an election he ran, but let's assume he does have those facts. Take it to the court. That's what the court exists for. And guess what? Just in the same way as the Organization of American States and others have looked at this process that has been going on in Guyana so closely, we would also look at what happens in that court when when they, when it is heard as an elections petition. And if the new AFC people are able to prove that by some unknown way, the election was rigged and 115,000 people voted that shouldn't, and the court finds that, guess what? The OAS and others will uphold that position as strongly as they were.
Right.
There should be a national recount. So if you are so firmly of the belief and you have the evidence that there was irregularity and wrongdoing to the tune of 115,000 votes, go to the court and let the court make that decision. That is the process. It isn't for you to decide it.
Of course.
Not for you to decide it. The reason there's an election court is so that the court can decide it based on the evidence that's put before them.
Great. Thank you, Sir Ron. And indeed, that is so, ladies and gentlemen. And the sentiment all across the country, as we would have expressed in our daytime program, is, as Sir Ron so eloquently put it, negotiate what? One cannot negotiate the results of the election. We can always talk thereafter, after a swearing in what happens. Leonard, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, dear gentlemen. I want to ask you, sir, and put maybe a couple of things in perspective. Number one, tomorrow is going to be the Court of Appeal decisions or announcement with the rulings. We are probably going to see a CCJ. In the meantime, do you believe, sir, that the OAS and the rest of the bodies and the rest of the countries are going to stand by waiting for that? Are we likely going to see some follow-up actions like what the U.S. Secretary of State would have said a couple of days back, last week or so?
No, I don't understand the question, Leonard.
My apologies. Do you believe that in the meantime, we are going to see, after tomorrow court case ruling at the COA, at the Court of Appeal, that there's going to be some other actions, because more than likely we are going to head straight to the Caribbean Court of Justice. This thing is not going to stop. More court cases are going to come. My question to you, sir, do you believe that there are going to be some swift sanctions that's going to follow? Because I think there is going to be, intolerance to what is happening.
Well, if this thing keeps going on, it goes back to the Caribbean Court of Justice. The Caribbean Court of Justice makes, again, which I assume it will reaffirm its original position. And that is not accepted. And that is not accepted. And the status quo remains, in which this president remains in office, and ministers or people who call themselves ministers are going about spending money they don't have authority to do. Then the international community is going to become very concerned about this. And the sanctions don't have to start with the OAS saying anything. They're going to start by the countries that have already said they're going to do it and have started doing it. And I will remind you one other thing. You know, Guyana is part of an economic partnership arrangement with the European Union. People should read that economic partnership arrangement agreement, because in it, it says that the EU expects its partners to run democratic countries in which things like elections are respected and so on. When that does not happen, it is an abridgment. It is a violation of that agreement. And it therefore produces circumstances in which the European Union itself will decide to abandon that agreement. It will have consequences for Guyana in terms of where you sell your but it will have consequences too, because the European Parliament and the European Commission are going to decide that there must be some form of penalty that should be applied to those who stop Guyana from being the democracy that everybody would wish to see it be. And so they will join the United States and Canada and others in applying sanctions. So, you know, let no one fool themselves that somehow this is going to go away. If the situation in Guyana escalates in a manner that denies democracy, delay, she's already delayed, but continues to deny it, then I'm afraid there is going to be action, and no one should fool themselves that there isn't going to be.
And I want to ask you, Sir Ron, if this entire thing has this whole nightmare that Guyana is going through, whether this whole question of Caribbean Court of Justice, uh, you know, what I'm really trying to get at, Caribbean Court of Justice, his rule is going to be asked to rule again on its ruling that it handed down about 2 weeks back. What impact has this going to have on the region in terms of the credibility of the Caribbean Court of Justice and its authority?
What if it rules on, if it rules
Is
a
this going to
finding
be
that,
asked? Look, it is going to be asked to rule again on what this has already been ruled,
well,
already ruled on.
if that's the process, but I mean, I don't think the Caribbean Court of Justice will continue to tolerate these appeals to it on a constant basis. At some point, it's going to say, look, enough is enough. This is a total abuse of the court system, which in fact it already is. But and at some point, everybody has said so. The Organization of American States Secretary General Musa Abadal said so quite plainly on more than one occasion. And he said it during the meeting of the Permanent Council on the 21st of July. Everybody regards what has been going on in relation to the court as an abuse
Sir
of
Ron,
process.
we are fading a little bit again, sir. My apologies. Yes. So, Ron, another question for you in terms of the local scenario here. Over the last month, Madam Justice Claudette Singh, Madam Justice retired Claudette Singh, chairman of GCOM, would have come under a lot of vicious attacks to her person, to her, attacks in many ways and forms. And it is believed that the three cases that are filed are also, at some stage the cases become a bit of a harassment as well. We noted that the U.S. ambassador and other ambassadors, in their speech about sanctions, they spoke well of the chairperson of GCOM. What are your thoughts, or what would you say to the Guyanese people, sir, in terms of the attacks on this good lady?
Well, this is what I would say. I remember early in the process when it was felt that she was taking a firm position on behalf of what they consider to be APNU AFC. Those supporters praised her. If she was being attacked by anybody, it was by people who didn't think that she was going to be supportive of them. And now, because there is some idea that she is not going to be supportive of the APNU, she's become an enemy. So opinions have changed with people's own political desires, their own ambitions, their own wants. And the truth is, the lady has probably been acting in a Solomon-like way from the very beginning. She knows that she had to make a declaration based on a credible result. National recount was conducted, a credible result was produced. Supervisors of each of those of that recounting process signed off on a piece of paper saying that we did the recount and this was right. Those supervisors all submitted their findings to the chief elections officer, which really should have been the basis for his report to GCOM. And had he done so, this situation would have been over with a long time ago. Yeah. But my own belief is that Claudette Singh has been under an enormous amount of pressure. I have to say that if she were a member of my family, I would want to comfort her every single day, because it must be terrible to be put in that position and to have the most awful things said about you when what she's doing is her job. And you must remember, this lady was a judge. She's had to deal with difficult cases. She's had to weigh evidence on one side or the other in coming to a decision. She's accustomed to this, but she knows that she cannot make a judgment that is not based on fact. And so that is a reality. People want to uh, crucify her at one point, one side or the other, when they fear that their own position is not going to be upheld by it. She's
Mm-hmm.
not there to uphold anybody's position. She's up there to uphold the facts. She's there to she's there to say what the actual votes were that were presented to her in a national recount that was taken over 33 days, scrutinized by a CARICOM team with an OAS observer team there, and that was counted by people in full view
Hmm.
and with supervisors giving the election result at the end of the day.
Yeah.
What what would people possibly want her to do other than to respond to that truth and those facts?
And Saron, you know, I want to take you back to the notion of the international relations, sir. Um, there is a feeling, in fact, a number of the incumbent persons in high positions would have shared on social media that let's hold tight, to use a Guyanese term, until November. The feeling they're sharing around seems to be that they hope that Biden would win the elections in the U.S. and then that would mean a complete reversal of the U.S.'s position on Guyana. Your comments, sir.
But it's a ridiculous idea. Um, one thing I can tell you, after being 5 years as an ambassador in the United States, albeit my diplomatic career was mostly in Europe and at international institutions in Europe, World Trade Organization, UNESCO, bilateral ambassador to Britain and to France. Uh, but if it is one thing I've learned in the 5 years I've been ambassador in the United States, it is that on foreign policy matters, particularly on matters of democracy, human rights, and civil rights, there's very little difference between the United States Republican Party and the United States Democratic Party. In fact, some of the uh, things I've seen written about the situation in Guyana and other parts of Latin America, the Democrats have taken a far more strident position on these matters than the Republicans have. So you must recall that, you know, Bush came out of office, and this is Bush II, and Obama came into office. I defy people to tell me, with the one exception of Cuba, which it took Obama to do in his second term, what was the difference in the policy between those two? It wasn't much. And if you ask me what was the policy difference in policy toward the Caribbean, I'd say we did better under Bush than we did under Obama. And typically, we've done better in trade and economic terms. We've done better on the Republican than we've done on the Democratic. So if anybody believes there's going to be some miraculous change in American position because Mr. Biden becomes president, if that is the will of the electorate of the United States, then I think they're barking up the wrong tree. They're going to look at the position of Guyana from an American prism, a party political prism. It's going to be what is happening in this country. Does it affect the values for which the United States stands? Is it affecting democracy? Is it affecting is it affecting human rights? Is it affecting political rights? If those boxes are all ticked, position remains the same. So anybody who believes that Mr. Biden is coming to office with some high on his priority list is doing something about that. And the establishment, what Mr. Trump in the first statement to office called the deep state, really are the people who run American foreign policy and advise on it. They will be there, and so will be the institutional memory of Guyana.
I think in a lot of ways they would have seen what transpired, you know, with the what's the country's name and the way that the foreign affairs would have been handled in Europe and Russia and stuff like that. and maybe they're thinking that Guyana would fall into thing. So, Ron, on the same international matter,
Are
sir.
you thinking of the Ukraine?
Yes, Ukraine. Thank you, sir. Yes. So, Ron, on the same international front, sir, the APNO AFC, they have said that notwithstanding over 100 countries in the world not supporting them, there is a belief that China, maybe Cuba, maybe Russia, the same Russia that they attacked for wanting to rig these elections, a manual election, manual process. There is a talk going on that these three countries seem to be backing them. What would be your response to that, sir?
The three countries being Russia, China,
And Cuba.
well, you know, I'd say this about Cuba. The Cuban government has fraternal relations with all Caribbean countries. And I think the Cuban government would tell you that they work with the government in office, which is a typical thing that they do. They don't care who it is in office. They're not going to give anybody any special treatment. But even if that were to be so, let's take Cuba, for instance. What
You
can Cuba do?
Sauron, could you please fix your mic, please? Bring it a little closer. Thank you.
Could I do what?
Your mic, it's going in and
Sorry,
out.
when you're erect like this, sir, Ron, it comes over much louder.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, no, I'm saying I doubt very much that Cuba will take sides in this matter. In any event, the Cuban Communist Party has had fraternal relations with the People's Progressive Party in Guyana in the pre-Castro days, and throughout that entire period of the Castro brothers, and now with this one. They've had similar relations with the People's National Congress, which is the main party of the APNU AFC. I mean, I know because I was there when much of those relations developed under President Burnham. So Cuba is not going to interfere in the relations of Guyana, in the matters in Guyana. It's going to step back from it. But it is going to want to, like the rest of us in the region, see this position of Guyana resolved. Cuba too wants to see Guyana move on. It's not in Cuba's interest for this instability and volatility to be happening in a neighboring state. That is the worry of all of us. We want Guyana to be stable. We want Guyana to move on. We want Guyana to become rich. We want Guyana to have a lot of money. Because the more money you have, the better able you will be to reach out to your colleagues in the Caribbean and be helpful to them. So we wish you well, and we wish you all the riches in the world, not because we want your money, incidentally, but because we believe that there will be opportunities for investment and cooperation between our countries to the mutual benefit of everybody. Remember, that is what Maduro did, not Maduro, Chavez did with Petrocaribe. He ensured that at the time of crisis, particularly after 2008, when it was a world economic recession, oil prices were at $150 a barrel. He arranged Petrocaribe, which gave Caribbean countries an opportunity to live, to survive, because they got oil. Not that they got it at a cheaper price, but they got it in a manner in which part of the price was a loan and part of it had to be paid for. And the loan was a long-term loan over a long period of time at very low interest rates. So it was almost a grant. But the point is that helped the Caribbean, something people remember. So the fact that Venezuela stopped being that country because of sanctions, because of Maduro holding on to power, because of the Americans and the Canadians and others going after it, was not helpful to us. And Guyana wouldn't be helpful to us if it were in that position. So everybody wants Guyana to do well. Not from, and people say, oh, because you want our oil money. No, we don't want your oil money. The Trinidadians used to say that as well. I tell people this story all the time. I'll never forget it. When I was working at the Caribbean Development Bank many years ago, and I was traveling on a CARICOM laissez-passer, diplomatic passport. I put it down in front of an immigration officer in Trinidad. Man looked at it and took his pen and he flicked it away. And he said to me, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, that's a CARICOM laissez-passer." Yes, I said, I opened it and I said, "You see, it has all the countries listed here from Antigua all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago." And he said, "CARICOM." He said, "All you all want is we oil. And you better have a passport. Are you in Trafalgar here today?" That's what he told me. Fine. As I was leaving, I couldn't resist the passing shot. I said this: "You have oil, and you say that oil don't spoil. But I hope one day you could eat that oil because it might be all you have." And you know what? I lived to see that happen. So this idea that people, because you suddenly have a wealth of riches, people want it. Not necessarily so. But in your own mind, if you live in a neighborhood, you don't, and you have anything, you want to make sure you look after the people who don't, because if you are not doing that, you're creating the potential for other things to happen, which would not be so good. They won't be your friends, in other words.
Right.
So, but that's down the road. All that I'm saying, the only point I'm making here is to say we have a deep and lasting, abiding interest in the well-being of Guyana, as much as for Guyana's sake as for the rest of the region.
Correct. And so, Ronald, in terms of human rights and the UN and CARICOM as well as OAS, Guyana is reaching a stage, sir, where at least those of us here, we believe that a lot of very, very bad things are happening in many of the areas across the country. There is abject poverty. Because of COVID-19, families have not been at work for many months. People are really punishing. There are many groups, civilian groups like ourselves, who have been going around communities, sharing out hampers as much as we can afford, with a lot of donations from brothers and sisters overseas. So, sir, the question I want to put to you is what would be the wider world view of a humanitarian crisis developing in Guyana as these elections are more and more protracted and delayed, sir?
Well, it is a concern. And the Secretary General of the OAS alluded to it in his statement on the 21st of July at that permanent council meeting, when he said the country needs a government that is managing this crisis. And you are in a crisis. The COVID-19 thing is killing people, and your figures are high. And you do need for it to be managed better. But you're only going to be able to manage it better if you have a government in office that is seen as legitimate, that can make decisions that the country is going to accept because they believe you are the people they elected. They put you in charge and they must give you an opportunity to do it. If there is resentment to the people who are making these decisions, then that resentment translates itself even in terms of the way in which they're managing the COVID-19 pandemic. That's not good for anybody. Guyana really needs to get around this matter now as a nation. It has to, a cohesive, coherent plan, comprehensive plan for dealing with COVID-19 has to be articulated. It has to have buy-in from civil society, from the Chamber of Commerce, from the trade unions, from all the political parties, because this is a matter of life or death.
Right.
One thing is for sure, elections won't kill you, but COVID will.
Yes.
So the thing to be doing is to prepare yourself to avoid the spread of COVID as best you can. And you're not going to be able to do it unless you are a government in charge, a government that is respected by the people, a government that commands the support of the country on the basis that they believe you won the election, therefore you must be given the opportunity to run the country for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sir, I
sir,
hate to put this question to you, but it is in a lot of persons' minds, and we have been receiving some inbox messages. People are looking at the worst case scenario because we have not had much to look forward to for over 140 days. The worst case scenario is that the government will stay in power regardless of what GCOM declares. For example, Hamilton Green, even though he excused his statement by saying lapsus linguae, he said David throw away the Constitution and the law. And you're seeing on social media a lot of the supporters of APNO AFC saying, declare a state of emergency, call a national assembly, bring together people and run the country. Sir, if that were to happen, as a worst case scenario, what are we looking at? Is there any possible UN intervention? What else can we look at that can bring some bit of mental relief to people?
Well, let me first of all say that if something like that were to happen, it would in effect be a coup d'etat.
Yeah.
Because you would be seizing the government. That's what you're doing. And parlaying the governmental process in the way that it's going now, for delays and excuses and so on, is one thing. People will tolerate that until the wire runs out. And the string here is as long as it takes to get back to the Caribbean Court of Justice and for them to make a decision. After that, the string is run out. Any actions that are taken after that are not in keeping with the decision of the Caribbean Court of Justice and the national recount is a coup d'etat. And a coup d'etat is treated very differently in the world community than this one. It will then become a United Nations Security Council matter. That's where the situation is going to end up. Now, why would we want to put Guyana through all of this pain? Why would we want to keep the people of Guyana in limbo all this time? Why would we like COVID to continue to take the lives of Guyanese on a daily basis, and we're not able to deal with it in the comprehensive and coherent manner that it needs to be? Why do we want to have people walking down the street, looking over their shoulder, fearful of one another? What is the benefit of any of that? Right. To do what? Just to keep a handful of people calling themselves ministers? It can't be worth it to anyone. And at some point, the very people who are blindly supporting them, people who are being urged to go out and do things on their behalf, are going to ask themselves, well, how much longer? And for what? And what am I getting out? What am I getting out of this? And if the answer to that is, well, you're keeping us here, that isn't going to be enough. People have bellies to feed. They have children to look after. They have medicines to buy. They have rent to pay. They have electricity bills that come in regardless of whether they support you or not. Mm-hmm. So these things have to be addressed. Those are the fundamentals of what a society is run on. And eventually, if these things are not addressed, there is going to be widespread dissatisfaction. Who would want to run anything in those circumstances? Right. To be what? To have ashes just simply so that you could say you are the king? Mm-hmm. Over ruins? That makes no sense. At least makes no sense to my mind. It may make sense to others, but not to me.
Leonard?
Yes, so Ron, how much of a dilemma is CARICOM in knowing that it has that quarters in Guyana, and Guyana is a founding member if Guyana turns or it continues on the same path?
Well, it is a huge problem. I mean, you think about it. It's not just that Guyana is a founding member, though it is a fact Guyana is a founding member. All of those who say, we can do without CARICOM and all of that, well, Guyana sells products to CARICOM. We are an export market for Guyana's goods. So when we buy goods from Guyana, we employ people. Those people work for factories and agriculture and rice and all of that we pay. When we stop buying it, those people don't have jobs. Government doesn't have revenue that comes from that source. And oil will benefit the oil industry eventually, if in fact you manage to get the money from the oil, that is, because that's another matter as to whether or not sanctions will stop you getting that money. But what about the rest of the economy? That has to continue to work on the same markets it's had before. You still have to sell to CARICOM. You still have to do things with CARICOM. You belong to a multiplicity of organizations in which you are involved with CARICOM? How do you replace those institutions on which you now depend for research and development in agriculture, for instance, for climate change research, all of those things to which you belong, to the Caribbean Development Bank, from which Guyana goes for loans and grants. You cut yourself off of all of those things if you say you have no interest in CARICOM. No, if a political factionalism in Guyana cannot dictate Guyana's relationship with the rest of the region, no more than the rest of the region can allow political factionalism to determine its relations with CARICOM. That can't happen.
Yog?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Sir Ronald. And Sir Ronald, in terms of the people of Guyana, yourself included among all the other countries that spoke at the OAS session, you would have acknowledged that the people of Guyana would have, been tolerant, would have been, keeping themselves in check. Sir, what, as a, pacifying message, what gentlemanly advice would you tell the Guyanese people at this time as we continue to bear the strain here, sir?
Well, the truth is, we all hope that Guyana will remain calm, the people will remain disciplined, that there will not be any violence on either side. But and that must be what they must continue to do. They must never feel abandoned, because they're not abandoned. The international community is there and is watching everything that happens. I am sorry that indeed there can't be a discussion with people in APNU who are and AFC who are now calling the shots. Understand, I understand that some of them really do believe that they were robbed of an election. I understand that there are people who feel that, genuinely feel, not all of them, but there are some who genuinely feel that they were robbed of an election. But if you genuinely feel that, if you are so convinced that that is the case, and you must be so convinced because you have evidence, you can't be convinced on a hunch. You can't be convinced on a guess. You have to be convinced on the facts. If you are so confident that that is so, then follow the course of the law. The law says there must be an election result declared. Once that election result is declared, if you are still so convinced that, and what it is that's motivating you to be as you are, that you were robbed of this election, then go prove it to the court. You've gone to the court so many times already. Why would you be reluctant to go to it once again?
Very true, Sir Ronald. And that is well said, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the international community certainly is on the side of the Guyanese people, and Sir Ronald Saunders has given us all of that assurance that do not feel abandoned, do not feel that no one is looking, and a call to the ACNO AFC, anybody who feels that these elections may not represent what you think it ought to, go to the elections court and let us deal with it there. Sir Ronald Saunders, as we start to wrap up our program, sir, it would be remiss of me if we do not acknowledge the great contribution of a gentleman, Mr. Owen Arthur, who would have passed recently, sir. And in room 592, in our last session here, we did acknowledge him. Sir Ron, I would like to ask you, sir, in a minute or 30 seconds, whatever it is you can, for some tributes, maybe from your side to the good works of Mr. Owen Arthur, sir. He has been really good, and I think we will always remember in Guyana for a long, long time, Sir Owen Arthur standing up in that elections commission building and say, take the badge. If that is what you're telling the international community, sir, he stood up by the Guyanese people to the very end. Over to you, sir.
Yes, he did. And he did stand up for the Guyanese people in many other ways. And I want to tell you one of those ways that for me would always mean something. When Arthur, during his stewardship as Prime Minister, The opposition, which was then the Democratic Party, the same party that's now the opposition. When he was prime minister, they put him under a lot of pressure by whispering at street corners and in the political hustings that Barbados was taking in too many Guyanese and they wanted to throw them out of the country. He was the prime minister. He said publicly, not on my watch. And he talked even then about the great attributes of the Guyanese people. And he said something that most people don't know. But you know, Barbados in the 1960s, the early 1960s, was not the Barbados that we know today. It was Guyanese who went to Barbados and invested their money, building the first hotel there, putting down the first tourist centers there. And he recalled that Guyanese had always made a contribution. And in fact, Guyanese, the interrelationship between Guyana and Barbados goes back in many ways. People don't know this, but when I was a boy, Barbadians came to Guyana as teachers, policemen, even as pork knockers. And some people will tell you they also came as thief men. That was a joke. But the point is they came and their intermarriage was quite considerable. You take names like Burnham and Hoyt and Greenwich and even Granger. They have their origins in some Barbadian who came to Guyana at some point in his life. But he said not on his watch. Now, what happened when he lost the government and the Freundel Stewart administration? Freundel was not yet the prime minister because the prime minister died a year after they come into office. Freundel Stewart was the attorney general. And the woman who became Minister of Foreign Affairs eventually, a woman called Maxine, I've forgotten what. But at that event, she was in charge of immigration. And they systematically, in the first 6 months in office, did exactly what Owen Arthur resisted. They kicked Guyanese out of the country, picked them up in the middle of the night, some of those women in their night dresses, and put them on planes and sent them back to Guyana. Now, I was astonished when Guyana gave that prime minister an award because what the reason for that award was, I really couldn't understand. But in any event, the person who deserved the award was Owen Arthur, because Owen Arthur stood up for Guyanese against his own political fortunes. He could have jumped on the political bandwagon and said, yes, let's throw them out. Let's throw them out because that was the popular thing to do. He did the unpopular thing. He stood up for Guyanese. So Guyana had a friend in Owen Arthur in many, many ways. And he was a remarkable man. But one thing I can tell you about him, he didn't mince his words. And he stood up for what he believed in and what he felt to be true. But above everything else, he was fear-minded. Fear-minded. And in his approach to Guyana during these elections and afterwards, that's what you saw. A man who was standing up for what he believed to be true, what he had seen to be true, and what he believed to be justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Sir Ron. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, Guyana will remember Mr. Owen Arthur for a long time. And also, Sir Ronald, I must tell you this, that, it is with great respect that a lot of Guyanese have been on our timeline here and talking about your contribution as well too. And sir, let me say on their behalf, on behalf of the thousands of Guyanese who have recognized your continued standing up for us and our people, our heartfelt thank you to you too, sir. I mean, from Berbice, there is Mr. Harry Gill, there is Nanda Sharif, there is Tita Ram Sewak, there is persons Rakesh from Essequibo, Mina Budram, Andre Ramana, people from the Caribbean, America, UK, all over the place. They are saying thank you And so, Sir Ronald Sanders, thank you, sir, for standing up for us. And we know you are going to continue to stand up for the Guyanese people, sir.
May I just say, I don't need to be thanked for standing up for what I believe to be right. Nonetheless, thank you for thanking me.
Thank you.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we are going to wrap our program up for tonight. Do remember that tomorrow at 1:30, we join Mr. Leonard Gildarie in our Elections Watch. We certainly have a lot of things to talk about tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Court of Appeal is going to hand its decision down. And tomorrow night in room 592, we're going to have our senior counsel, Mr. Anthony Astefan from the Caribbean region. He will be in room 592 along with our local attorney at law, Mr. Sanjeev Dattadin, as we dissect and read into the Court of Appeal's decision that will be handed down tomorrow. So we look forward to your company tomorrow on Elections Watch, COVID-19 Watch. And we say thank you all for joining us tonight, as we also say thank you, Sir Ronald Sanders, for joining us here again. My co-host, thank you. Kaieteur Radio crew and team, thank you all. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a great night. And wherever you're joining us from, please remember, say a prayer for this beautiful country of ours. It is still the best place in the world. Stay safe. Bye-bye now. Thank you, Sarah.